Simon groaned awake with a throbbing headache and a bittersweet taste making his tongue feel furry. The rest of his body felt warm, cozy, and naked underneath a blanket. He remembered where he was. "Morning, love." Bruce nibbled into Simon's ear and hugged him tighter. They cuddled each other beneath a blanket on the futon they had set up at the back of the AI studio of the T-Strike building. Simon loved these moments where he woke in Bruce's arms. He still didn't understand why Bruce couldn't live with him. They were always making excuses to be together overnight somewhere. Of course, it was natural to have insecure thoughts and imagine the worst reasons. Simon was no stranger to being in a relationship with men whom he believed loved him, only to find out they were testing out their straight with him. Many times he faced heartbreak for that reason. What the hell did testing out your straight even mean? You were either gay or not. In love or not. His relationship with Bruce came as a shining light to his faded hope. Their love affair began awkwardly and on shaky ground, with misunderstandings aplenty. Bruce turned out different from all the others. He was the first man to fight for him and make him feel like he was the one. He gave all of his heart to Bruce, pushing aside his insecurities and fears.
"Hey Bruce, I know I keep asking, but why can't we live together?"
Simon asked, feeling Bruce's heartbeats against his back. "It's complicated. I love you very much. You're my life." Bruce sighed, brushing aside the hard question with a passionate kiss. Persistent ringing pulled Bruce out of the kiss. He leaned over Simon for his phone on the stool next to the futon that serviced as a side table, and expelled a heavy sigh at the voicemail message he listened to.
"What is it?"
Simon asked, worried. "Nothing, just my mother." Bruce rushed off his question as he quickly locked his phone and placed it on the floor. Simon frowned, feeling seeds of insecurity swirl about his heart again. "You're pouting inside." "I feel it." Bruce teased Simon. Simon sighed.
"Don't cheat on me, okay?"
"What? Is that going through your mind?" Bruce clicked his tongue, annoyed.
"Then why did you hide the message from me?"
Bruce shuffled out of the cuddle and blankets. He hastily dressed and scooped up his phone.
"Bruce?"
Simon sat up, perplexed. "You know I love you, right?"
"Yes. At least I want to believe it,"
Simon answered, a bit spitefully. Bruce shook his head when he picked up his keys and bag near the door. "After all this time being together, you still refuse to trust my honesty in this relationship." Bruce angrily threw back to Simon before slamming the studio door behind him. Simon sat shaken by the quick turn of events. He cursed his splitting headache that had resurfaced and spiteful habit of testing his relationship. Of course, he didn't think Bruce would do anything to hurt him. Yet he was struggling to accept that there were things his lover kept from him. They had been dating for almost 2 years, but they hadn't really progressed further as a couple.
"It's not wrong to be greedy or worried, right?"
Simon swallowed back his question and tears that strayed from his eyes. His phone ringing disturbed his thoughts. He quickly fixed himself up and answered the call.
"Adrian."
"You're still in the office, Simon?"
Adrian's voice asked, oblivious to Simon's earlier dilemma and tears.
"Yeah? What do you need?"
Simon sighed.
"I need you to access Joel's old drive on the main network and pull files for Project Songbird."
Simon shuffled off the futon to turn on one of the PCs, balancing his phone on his ear.
"All of them?"
"Yes. Send them to me via secure drive."
Adrian answered and ended the call.
"Right."
Simon slowly exhaled and glanced about his body, realizing he was standing before a work computer but naked. The irony of his morning made him chuckle sarcastically as he dressed. He thanked Adrian's phone call for keeping his mind busy with work. It stopped him from spiraling into a place of self-loathing.
"Why Joel's old files now?"
Simon frowned with curiosity. He hadn't been involved with the A Human conceptual project at the time, as this had been managed by Joel. Something must have popped up unexpectedly for Adrian to ask for the files. Of course, his curiosity was piqued. It took him a few goes to decrypt the drive. He used the decryption, waiting time to go out of the studio for coffee. When he returned, the files were ready for viewing. He perused through documents, most being irrelevant. One caught his interest within the project's commercial folder. He opened up the file and read through the terms and conditions. His eyes widened with shock at a passage.
What the? Joel, what the hell were you thinking?
Simon cursed out loud. He hastily closed up the file in folders, zipped and uploaded them to Adrian's private cloud drive. The fact made him think that an old friend had returned to their lives.
God? Can this morning be any more troublesome?
He groaned as he cleared the computer's history and reset the drive's encryption before closing down the machine. He grabbed his keys bag and locked up the studio on his way out. Bradley sent a message to Simon about having to go to his old job to sign some exit forms in the morning, before setting his phone on the charger and climbing in bed to sleep. Just as he was about to drift into a deep sleep, the phone beeped and flashed light towards the ceiling. He groaned as he fumbled about the night table for his phone. Who the hell sends a message at midnight? His eyes squinted at the screen as he read the culprit's name. It was from Adrian. His heart raced with panic for the worst and some other feelings.
Sorry for the late message. Just wanted to say, looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Sleep well.
Adrian's message was short and random. Bradley frowned, perplexed. Did all CEOs send sleep well messages to their subordinates? Or was this something of a cryptic challenge letter? He shook off the last far-fetched thought in his head. There was no way that man saw him as anything other than a clueless product template for his company. If he did, it would be wrong, right? There was nothing wrong with two guys being in a relationship. Same-sex couples could even get officially married. Is a CEO allowed to be gay? He whispered aloud, which made his cheeks flush red and mind wide awake. His frown deepened, wondering if Adrian had received the message he had sent Simon. Maybe it triggered his message to him. Why at this godforsaken hour? It wasn't as if he was working a day in his old workplace. It would be just a quick sign-and-go formality. He resettled his phone to the charger and laid back in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling. His troubled thoughts circled through his mind, keeping him awake until the early hours of the morning. His last conscious thought was a recap of his ex-boss's message telling him he had been fired. The next morning, Bradley was standing outside Micom IT's building within the World Square complex. The complex consisted of other high-rise buildings for IT and financial organizations, which ran around each other in a square formation. At the center was an avant-garde courtyard with moonstone slate tiles, forming a pattern of a black-white deco star at the heart. Half-moon marble benches framed tall red plum and cherry blossom trees, which were positioned aesthetically around the star's points. Micom IT's building was the far end from the star's north point. It shared the same gray brick skyscraper with a professional auditor. The smell of morning coffee stimulated Bradley's nervous tension. "Morning, Bradley," said an elderly man. Bradley turned to greet the complex's cleaner, who was dressed in blue overalls and other protective work gear as he wheeled a blue garbage bin across the courtyard. "Good morning, Pete." Bradley cordially greeted him. "Haven't seen you about, Sonny. Been on leave?" Pete innocently asked. Bradley stifled a groan. He forced a smile to the man's question. "Something like that." "Well, Sonny, you missed out on something interesting last Friday," Pete said with a conspiratorial tone of voice. He shared some detailed gossip about the courtyard being overcrowded with news crews and zealous fans who had camped out in the courtyard on the morning to bombard two celebrities who were to meet with Micom IT's CEO. Someone had leaked the time when Erica Moniker and her A-list boyfriend were to arrive at the building. It had been clear by the handmade banners and chanting from fangirls the frenzy was for Erica's boyfriend, who was a global heartthrob with his high-profile movies. The local police had to barricade the front entrance of the Micom IT building from mobs of fangirls declaring their love for the A-list actor and telling him to dump Erica. Erica was being portrayed as a witch on some of their banners. This attention had left most of MyCom IT's workers in a frenzy or state of curiosity when the celebrity couple had trailed an entourage of flashing cameras and persistent reporters hurrying after them with stick microphones pushed to their faces into the marble foyer. Neither celebrity had acknowledged their existence as they followed the building's security into a secure elevator. Why did they arrive like that? Bradley frowned, finding it bizarre a celebrity would walk into a workplace like a common person. "Sonny, everything's PR these days," Pete answered knowingly. "Got a lot of the shop owners narky when them fans camped out on their chairs without paying." Pete and Bradley had some more small talk before they resumed their own business. Bradley entered the glass double doors of his old building, wondering how the foyer would have been during that time. He glanced about the white marble foyer that shined from the strong morning light beaming through the building's wall-sized windows. It was large enough to fit in about 100 people at a time, if needs be. That day must have made the foyer like a sardine can. "Bradley, strange not seeing you about the last few days," said a beefy security guard in a black business suit and Bluetooth earpiece to his left ear. The building's management red-white logo was sewn cleanly to his right breast pocket. "Morning, Dan." Bradley cordially greeted the middle-aged man who never failed to test his arm sockets with a firm handshake. "Been on leave?" Dan politely questioned Bradley with a raised brow. He was aware of Bradley because of the unethical long working hours that made him known to the security staff as Level 26's walking furniture. "Something like that," Bradley cordially answered and yelped when the man slapped him heartily on the back. "Good for you. God knows you need to do something more in your life than work for the man," Dan remarked jovially. "Right," Bradley sighed. "You missed something interesting last Friday." Dan baited Bradley into hot office gossip. Bradley learned more about the visiting celebrities to MyCom IT's presidential floor that was 2 floors above his old one. It seemed they were there to discuss business on a new product the company had planned as competition against T-Strike's a human product. It was followed by a tour of key floors, which had caused mass disruption to a lot of the workers' routines. "You lucky duck. When Big Chuck's toured your floor with them Hollywood stars, that hot model lady sat at your desk and looked over your things." Dan chuckled as he nudged his side with friendly elbowing. "Seemed really interested in your stuff too." Bradley frowned, perplexed. "Really? Why?" "Who knows what those people think?" Dan answered and swung his arm around Bradley's shoulder, keeping him in a mate's hold. "I bet it was a passing fancy, like when you have to sit in a doctor's waiting room. Just make sure you wash your hands after handling the stuff on your desk." "Wash my hands, why?" "Some guys were going on about how they won't wash their hands when they shook that models." Dan chuckled. I think I'm okay with washing my hands," Bradley coolly answered. He sighed when Dan released him. Bradley changed topics when he asked if his pass card was still okay to use. Why wouldn't it be?" Dan questioned, not hiding his suspicion. "I had it with my credit card, they rubbed a bit." Bradley awkwardly gave an answer. Dan dropped his suspicion. He checked Bradley's security pass on a scanner at the front desk near the elevators. "Still seems good." Dan handed back the pass card to Bradley. Bradley thanked the man as he gingerly stepped into the gold glass elevator, lighting up the round number 26 button with a press of a finger. He stared at his frowning face in the elevator's mirror doors, noticing his fringe hung messily over his round brown eyes that were showing signs of sleep deprivation. Even his skin was looking more pasty than usual. He blamed a certain CEO for his recent sleep problems. "Gurge." He let out a moan when his baby blue business shirt was creased from where it was tucked into his black slacks. He smoothed down the creases the best he could. Being a skinny runt meant that shirts didn't smooth out easily when in this state. His self-reassessment moved to thoughts about this pass. He was there to be officially fired, but he felt it strange that security wasn't aware of it. He gasped with the thought that maybe his ex-boss wasn't going to fire him. If that was the case, what would this mean for his employment with T-Strike? An abrupt ding interrupted his thoughts. The elevator doors opened to the sight of his old floor. He gingerly stepped out, glancing about the open office of white S-shaped desk pods with flat-screen monitors, clean workspaces with picture frames of fun times, holiday destinations, or family plastered around the cubicle partition walls as a reminder of reasons why people worked. As usual, the floor was vacant at 5 a.m. The cheap gray carpet made his pant hems stick to his ankles with static as he scurried to his old desk against a solid white wall near the elevator area. His desk was positioned away from the glass panel windows, showing an interesting view of neighboring high-rise buildings. It was nestled in a quieter corner where he had a clear view of people who came and went from the elevators. He was hoping he could delay the inevitable for a bit longer whilst he collected his thoughts and try to figure out what things of his that Erica woman had touched. The only items she could have taken curiosity to was his attack on Titan mug and matching card stand that held a photo of him with Jace at a soccer match.
Bradley, come this way.
Deacon called out to him from the other side of the floor near the elevators. Bradley quickly shoved his cup and photo display into his carry bag and walked soberly toward the man. He gingerly followed behind the burly back of his old boss. He had half expected the man to throw the forms at him with some abuse, but the silence from him unnerved him the most. He wasn't prepared for it. Trepidation for the worst constantly nagged his brain, so much so that he failed to notice he had followed the man into an elevator, out onto the 28th floor, and down a lavish marble-stone corridor with large oak-wood frames of MyCom IT's history and founders lining the glistening gray-green splashback walls. He noticed his destination when they faced the frosted glass double doors of the chairman's office. It was his first time standing before those doors, which he had only seen on the company's internal news site. "What are we doing here?" he whispered. Deacon smirked as he knocked on the doors and drew them open on command.
Charles. Bradley James as requested.
Deacon gruffly addressed Bradley to the wiry man sitting in the rich mahogany high-back leather chair behind a polished redwood business desk that had nothing out of place. Not even a paper clip. The pen cup, perched to one corner, had pens of the same color stacked evenly. The stationery organizer tray held the same type of items and colored contents, in perfect harmony and alignment. Not an inch of dust or wear was visible on the desk's surfaces. It was a picture of perfection. Charles sat back in his chair to regard Bradley. Bradley wondered about the man's resemblance. His deep-set brown eyes and gentle curving jawline were familiar features. His brown hair was cut clean, short and off his face, so his stern expression was clearly visible. Like the flawless desk arrangement, the man was a perfect image of an astute CEO. He was impeccably dressed in a crisp dark gray pinstripe suit and polished cufflinks, reflecting the soft light from the downlights running dotted rows along with the ceiling. The man's voice surprised Bradley. He knew where he had heard a similar voice before.
"So you are the man who has brought trouble to my company?"
Charles stated the point of the visit. Bradley's eyes bulged with confusion and panic. What was this man saying? Since when did he cause trouble? His heart raced when he thought over the incident with Adrian and his sudden employment with T-Strike. If he looked at it from his old company's perspective, he would be committing a conflict of interest. Oh shit, he thought, doing his best not to crumple to the floor like a nervous mess.
"I learned from IT security that critical prototype testing data of Project Daisy is missing where it should be available. There is no history of it being misfiled. Rather, the only history is the data being moved onto a removable storage device."
Charles continued to inform Bradley of his situation. Bradley's mind was in a state at hearing the name of the project he had been testing data for. He didn't know the end purpose of the segment of code he was testing, since each test analyst managed different segments to ensure an agile delivery and product secrecy.
"Turns out it was data you were responsible for. I'm sure your project manager would have informed you that your segment was critical and top secret."
Charles continued, taking pleasure in making his thief fear for the worst. "Of course, I never took the code home. I always locked my work, Bradley tried to defend his innocence but found his voice growing weak into a whimper. Charles coolly stood and approached Bradley. "My team informed me that you sold the data to Adrian Masters." Bradley stood stupefied. Time and space warped around him with the crimes that the man was accusing him of. His mind touched on the contract he had signed with T-Strike. Was this all planned by Adrian, doing to him what spies did on shows like Burn Notice? Was he really tricked into having company data stolen from him? How? He never left his test laptop unlocked and always adhered to sign-on security policies, knowing he was handling sensitive and high-value data even if he didn't know what that data's end purpose was. Then again, the situation with Adrian was highly suspicious and almost too easy. How would Adrian have known he would be running past his car door? His train had been running late. Adrian did say he needed him to be his product's template, but was that just to keep him from suspecting that he had MyCom IT data stolen from him? Nothing added up when he looked at the situation from that angle. If he looked at their meeting as a matter of coincidence, it made much more sense. Adrian had been convincing with his reasons for tricking him into his business. If he had wanted to steal data from him, wouldn't he have engaged him in some other way? His mind spiraled further with confusion and fear, turning his logic on the situation into the mud.
Now, we can file a lawsuit against you for IP theft and damages to company property.
Charles coolly laid down his law. "I didn't sell or steal anything." Bradley continued to whimper his innocence.
I have evidence, Bradley, that you did do something.
Charles snapped. He clicked his fingers to call over Deacon. Bradley was handed photos from CCTV footage of himself bending over Adrian, as Adrian was stepping out of the car, Erica. Adrian had his hand out like he was receiving something, but the photo didn't clearly capture what was being handed over. Either way, it definitely looked like an exchange had taken place from the angle that had captured them. "This isn't what you think. I slammed into his car door accidentally." Bradley found his voice with protest.
Silence, thief.
Charles's voice boomed in his ears. Bradley gulped down the rest of his defense.
Now, as I was saying.
The doors flung wide to interrupt Charles's spiel.
This is a mistake. Deacon, you're wrong, and you know it.
Adam's voice carried over to them when he stormed into the room.
My dear nephew. Just in time.
Charles smirked at Adam's rude intrusion. Bradley glanced at both men, realizing the uncanny resemblance, although Adam was far more pleasant to behold.
In the 2 years I've known him, he'd never do something like this. He's very meticulous with IT security.
Adam defended Bradley.
So you've watched him carefully?
Charles turned his line of questioning to Adam.
What are you getting at?
Aren't you supposed to be starting a job with T-Strike today on a project?
Charles's mouth twisted with a smirk. Adam fell silent.
I see.
Charles returned to this power chair behind the desk.
I will hold off pressing charges on both of you if you will reclaim the data you stole, along with construct data for T-Strike's A-Man product.
What? Bradley found his voice. I didn't steal anything. There's no way I'd know where to look for such a thing. Adam sighed, realizing the trap that both he and Bradley had made for themselves.
Fine, but I want your written word that no charges will be pressed after we do this. Bradley is released from this company without a stain on his record.
Adam, are you in any position to negotiate a deal? You have played your last card with this family. Do as you are told or pay the piper. That is all.
Charles coldly sealed the deal on their conversation.
Oh, and yes, both of you are free to leave this company without severance. Deacon will inform security accordingly. He'll ensure you uphold your agreement, gentlemen.
Adam grabbed Bradley's arm and dragged him out of the room. Deacon followed the men with a sour expression on his face. Something felt off with his plans. He had sent Adam a message to tease him about Bradley being accosted by Charles. It was the first time he saw him stand up to his uncle. Twisted emotions squeezed at his heart with a realization that no one could replace Adam in his bed. That man was his. He'll make sure the Bradley twerp was out of the picture.